The world is very interested in what's happening in Australia right now. All eyes seem to be focused on us, and our COVID response has been described variously as Orwellian, draconian, and a failure. How has it come to this? We're all proud Aussies, but you've got to admit our COVID response has in many ways been an embarrassment.
Well, thanks, Rita, and thanks for having me. Look, it certainly does appear that way from the outside, and I think in many of our jurisdictions, it appears that way because it has been that way. I mean, you only have to look at the scenes coming out of Melbourne over the last, few months, and rewatching Battleground Melbourne the other night to sort of go over what has actually happened in a chronological manner just reminds you of what's happened in Melbourne and what's happened in some of the jurisdictions around the country. So, look, the Americans are fascinated. They're fascinated, I think, because they have this image of Australia in their mind, the Crocodile Dundee days and, floating around on the harbour and everyone's carefree and fanciful. And I think that's because we were. And right at the moment, we are not. And in many ways, I think we have lost a lot of those freedoms, and we hope they're only for the short time. But this actually is more alarming when you actually look at it in more detail than we realise. What's happening in the Northern Territory with some of the statements that are being made by Chief Minister Gunner there and now in WA as well. The Americans are fascinated. They're fascinated because I think they're worried that some of this stuff is going to translate over into their own world as well. So they want to get their heads up.
Well, I just came back from the US, spent 3 weeks there, got back last night, and I can tell you they are fascinated, and often the question is, what's going on? Have you lot gone crazy over there? So there's a mixture of fascination and mockery and fear because they just can't believe some of the stories they're hearing about our country. You're a member of the government, but you've been critical of the government's COVID restrictions, the mandates, the overreactions. Is anyone within the government listening to you?
Oh, look, I think there are many inside the federal government that share many of those concerns. And I mean, I think here in South Australia, for example, I've been very critical of the manner in which our SA health bureaucrats have been mandating and forcing these rules. I mean, the sorts of things you see in an SA health boardroom just don't fly in the real world because bureaucrats don't need to have to justify employee payrolls and all the other things that go along with these COVID restrictions we've seen. So look, I think there are many, and they vary state by state. We have had a better run of it here, I think, than other states like WA and of course in Victoria, where it's been so awful. But it doesn't mean that we don't need to speak about it. I just think that there are dangers involved in politicians gifting powers to their bureaucrats, throwing the keys to the bureaucrats because there is no accountability. And, that is something that the Americans have been really, really interested in, amongst other things. I mean, the other thing they're fascinated by are these, quarantine camps. And I don't think they're getting reported enough here, frankly. Whatever the intention is, the look is bad.
It is, and it seems like almost our media is defensive about some of these measures and the criticism coming from overseas. And it's not just coming from America. Certainly with the Djokovic saga, we're getting now criticism from many parts of Europe and other parts of the world where they just can't believe what's happening in Australia. You mentioned our global reputation and how we were seen as a larrikin nation, easygoing. That has been trashed fairly comprehensively over the last couple of years. Will we be able to recover that reputation and again be known for those characteristics, or is that lost forever?
Well, look, I hope we can, and you do see some worrying trends, though. I saw the other day at the cricket in Melbourne, people getting ejected for sculling beers. Now, in the world of cricket, that is absolute heresy. And in fact, when we have a former Prime Minister that used to be a past master of that, it says a lot about how far we've come and gone. So, look, I don't know. And I know Rowan did a show a while back about the death of the Australian larrikin. And, I think he was very right about some of that. This is, of course, the insidious creep of the left. The march through the institutions is no longer just about schools and universities and the government. It's also about entertainment, and I think the left and comedy do not mix because irony is not on their smorgasbord. So I think we need to push back, and I think Aussies historically have done what they've done. They've thumbed their nose at that sort of behaviour, and let's hope they keep doing it and we don't lose too much of it.
Well, let's hope so. Now, moving along, there was a report in the Daily Telegraph today about the ballooning bureaucracy in New South Wales. It's been reported that the number of highly paid bureaucrats has risen at a rate of 3 times the amount of nurses employed by the New South Wales state government. We keep hearing, Alex, about a health crisis and hospitals being under pressure. How can the New South Wales government justify spending that much on bureaucrats instead of nurses and frontline staff?
Yeah, look, I don't know, and I don't know what the rationale for that is. Of course, there may be very good reasons. Once in a blue moon, there are very good reasons for increasing the bureaucracy. I can't actually think of any off the top of my head at the moment, but I'm sure they exist. But COVID would be that type of environment, presumably, and I'm sure Premier Perrottet will look at that as you would expect a good Premier like him would. But, I mean, it does highlight the point, doesn't it, that this is sort of, I think it was Parkinson's law about bureaucracies, that more work incurs more work in a bureaucracy, and we see that with our health bureaucrats all the time. They start with rules and directions, and then you need managers in order to oversee those rules and directions, and then you need compliance officers to go on over and see those compliance, and before you know it, you've got a massive bureaucracy, and it's a worry. I think Australians need to sharply reject big government as much as we can. The drift is on. We're seeing that throughout COVID. The experience has been that governments have ballooned and small businesses taken a bit of a beating, and that's not good. We don't want that. We don't want to be a society that ultimately ends up being more reliant than we presently are on government. I think we're seeing the drift there, but. We need to all take a step back on this side of politics and have a look at this issue, because it's a growing one.
Absolutely, and the worry is that drift is happening under a coalition government. So what's it going to look like when Labor get in, if Labor get in? So Senator Alex Antic, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks for having me.